Hey guys, what is up? Chris here with Cohesive Friendship Unit. Just me today. Guys, with the new Risk of Rain 2 patch being Skills 2.0, that means we need a new character tier list, and that is exactly what this video is going to be about. Before we hop right into it, guys, let me know what you think in the comments. Who you think the top character is in the game right now, who you think the bottom tier character is in the game right now, and if you like this content, we got a whole Risk of Rain 2 playlist for you guys to check out, and maybe subscribe if you're enjoying what you see. Okay, so first I want to talk Scorched Acres, the last update, and go through that tier list that I made. At top tier I had Engineer and Rex, mid tier I had Multi, Commando, and Huntress, and low tier I had Artificer and Mercenary. And this time, because we have a new character being Loader, I've decided to add another tier. So we're going to have low, mid, high, and top tiers this time. And I think the big things to point out that have changed in the game, besides the obvious Skills 2.0, are the Malachite enemies and the Celestine enemies, which are fairly common now. Getting the bosses of those varieties are fairly common. They have a lot of health. They can totally stop your healing, etc. And that healing has been nerfed significantly in Tiers 2.0. Specifically, there was a 250% healing buff that was only supposed to be on Drizzle difficulty, but it was applied to Normal and Monsoon difficulties. So without that healing, that combined with Malachites especially, makes healing very, very valuable now, where it wasn't as important before. So those are just kind of the meta shifts. There's going to be a time-stamped comment pinned that will give you each tier, including the final tier list, if you guys need to hop around. Okay, let's start with low tier. And once again, last iteration. Guys, this is an all-encompassing tier list. This covers single player, multiplayer, all difficulties. I'm trying to look at the character holistically in the game. Alright, low tier. We have Artificer at bottom tier. Guys, Artificer, I think this is the most consistent placed character on the tier list, and I hate to see it. I love the Artificer. I love the idea of the Artificer, at least. I love needing to basically calculate cooldowns at all times. Like, you always have to manage your cooldowns like no other character. And I love the Rayman like hover mechanic, but the mobility is just not enough for the Artificer, and that is really what holds the Artificer back. Well, the hovering is really good, especially for stages like Scorched Acres. It's not the general speed of the character is very, very weak, and there's no dash or teleport that a solid half of the cast has, and there's no real health to speak of. You are where someone like Multi has a lot of health but not a lot of mobility. The Artificer not only doesn't have a lot of mobility, but does not have a lot of health. I will say, incredible damage potential, but when you can only afford to get hit once, it doesn't matter that much, especially when there are basically better options for similar damage output. Alright, next on low tier, Multi. Multi has probably moved the most since Risk of Rain 2 came out in early access, and I don't know, I used to really like Multi and think of Multi as a very high character. Still fun to play, but has moved significantly lower in the tier list. Part of the reason is that nerfed healing and the increased presence and presence of all of Malachite enemies. When Multi has trouble escaping and needs to be relatively close to use the highest damage attack that Multi has, it puts Multi at the risk of basically taking a lot of damage. If you take damage from the Malachite enemy, then you aren't able to heal for 8 seconds, and just taking general damage at all really hurts Multi when healing has been nerfed in general. Multi basically relies on his large health pool and tanking damage, but when healing is way harder to come by now, it makes things a lot harder for Multi, because Multi's mobility just isn't good enough to get Multi out of situations, so when Multi takes damage and doesn't have the healing to get the health pull back, basically is a trapped character. So basically bad locomotion, inability to escape from Malachite, swarms of enemies, etc., and really not enough damage output to ultimately compensate for the HP and movement that he has. And that's it for low tier, guys. We are going to move on to mid tier, followed by high and then top tier. First on mid tier is Commando. No surprise, this is the rock solid character in Risk of Rain 2. This character has not moved from my really anywhere in my tier list since this game came out. There's a reason Commando is in the middle, and that is because Commando is the Mario in Smash Brothers of Risk of Rain 2. Decent health, decent mobility, decent range, decent damage output, jack of all trades, master of none. And I mean, that's honestly probably a good thing that Commando is smack dab in the middle and will continue to stay smack dab in the middle. I guess the only thing I want to highlight about Commando is because is fairly generic, can basically do okay. It's easy to get a good Commando in that basically any items will help Commando about equally, but at the same time it's very hard to get a very focused, excellent Commando. Whereas with the right items, with Huntress or Engineer or Rex or Mercenary, you can really make that character excel. With Commando, it's much harder because again, everything is so average and nothing is spectacular on the base level of the character. Alright, next on mid tier, probably will get the most hate for this one, is Mercenary. A lot of people online are big proponents of the Mercenary, and while I acknowledge the Mercenary is a good character, this is actually a good time to say I don't think any of these characters are unusable. I'm just ranking them for their usability. And Mercenary, I think, is in the middle. Mercenary has great mobility, which is something I'm going to talk about at the end of this video as being very critical in the game right now. Mercenary has great mobility, okay enough health for the mobility that he's given, has great iframes or invincibility frames where the Mercenary is essentially invulnerable depending on what animation you are executing at the time, and the Mercenary does have insane damage output. But since we are going from mid tier to high tier, being able to do more specialized things is going to become more important. And what the Mercenary really lacks, where the Mercenary is probably, it has all the fundamentals, but it lacks the specialties of crowd control, which I think is extremely important, and range, where even Loader has a vague range attack with the R button on PC that sends out that drone that shocks. Also, Loader has the ability to fly in and out of situations much faster than Mercenary, pin onto many enemies as if it was a ranged attack, and using that shift attack on PC with Loader where you charge up, that attack is essentially a projectile in that you are damn near invulnerable while it's being executed, and it sends you through enemies. So that's where Mercenary lacks as a melee only character, where Loader excels, but we will get onto Loader later. Again, Mercenary's not bad, just is failing in the more critical parts of the top tier characters. And that concludes mid tier. Let's shift over to high tier. First on the high tier, I have Engineer. I was actually really planning to send Engineer way down to the bottom for a number of reasons. When I was planning on this, when Skills 2.0 was just about to come out and Scorched Acres was being sunset, the mindset at the time was, it's much more at the stage in the game, it's much more important to be able to prevent damage at all. That means getting enemy items like Tougher Times, Aegis, and Topaz Brooch. That's much more important than healing in general. That coupled with the Engineer's damage output being nerfed, and just, again, mediocre stats on the Engineer from a movement standpoint and a damage output standpoint. But Engineer has been moved up to high tier thanks to, again, that healing change in the game, where healing is much more important both as a solo player and in a squad. As a squad, it is very important to not only be able to heal yourself, but be able to heal others, and that is where the engineer has always excelled. It just didn't matter as much up until now. It's great to have some Fusseling Bunguses on those turrets. Unfortunately, one of the skills doesn't allow for this, but it's still great to have the engineer with that healing. And the engineer also, well, the mobility is limited. The fact that the engineer can throw down a shield that is basically impervious to attacks unless something goes through the shield almost is a at least short-term excuse for the engineer's lack of mobility. If you're in a pinch, you can throw down a shield, whereas someone like the artificer, if they're in a pinch, are totally screwed. And next on high tier is Rex. And Rex, we mentioned in Scorched Acres, is pretty critical because Rex has insane damage potential from the get-go, along with being the only character with healing capabilities from the get-go. And that healing thing, again, goes back to the Skills 2.0 healing nerf, where it is so important to heal in this. Now that Rex has healing out the gate and has had healing out the gate, it's just much more important now. It's basically a godsend. It takes a huge chunk of stress off of you just by having any form of healing right from the start. Like I said, Rex's damage output at the start is just absolutely ludicrous, and the enemy control potential is super good. Risk of Rain 2 has a lot of enemies, and the game has gotten harder, and being able to control, slow down, and ultimately kill large groups of enemies is extremely important, which is a trend you're going to see in this high to top tier. Speaking of top tier, there are only 2 characters left, so you know who they are. Let's start with Huntress. Huntress has a lot of things that I've been talking about as being critical in Risk of Rain. There is a minor Achilles heel, but we'll talk about that. Huntress has insane crowd control, which is extremely important. Not only does Huntress have insane crowd control, but Huntress has insane damage output, and that's just like the perfect duo. Being able to do a lot of damage, much like Rex, and being able to control a large portion of the crowd. Huntress also has really good movement, kind of cooked in. Huntress's speed is very solid, along with the blink ability that Huntress has, along with the R ability that Huntress has that allows her to shoot that rain of arrows. That just helps with mobility at the end of the day. Huntress is extremely good, with probably the exception of the health pool. The health pool is a huge problem with the Huntress. However, the fact that the Huntress can do great crowd control makes healing items very useful in general. Not like the base healing items like medkits and Cautious Slug, but items that reward you for doing damage, like Leeching Seed, like Harvester's Scythe. These are all things that other characters can struggle with, where like Artificer might not be able to, based on the cooldowns, be able to constantly inflict damage or be able to do rapid amounts of hits, so Leeching Seed isn't as helpful, whereas Huntress can just decimate mobs of enemies, especially queued up with a cube or using one of Rex's traps. So Huntress, very good. In addition, Huntress can pretty easily pair up with the Topaz Brooch and Aegis very well and keep very high shields on top of, you know, obviously the tougher times or items that any enemy or character can pick up. And last but not least, at the top of the mountain is Loader. Loader has by far the best movement, really good obvious synergies with items like the Focus Crystal, has the ability to create a shield for doing damage much like Topaz Brooch or Aegis, basically built in from the start, which we already talked about is very important, and has insane damage output. And I already mentioned why Loader is better than Mercenary as a melee-only character. The ability to go through enemies, essentially turn your body into a projectile, zip in and out of situations faster and more efficiently, as well as just generally have better movement. Not that the Mercenary has bad movement by any means. Loader is absolutely ludicrous. And honestly, I think next to Rex has the highest skill ceiling to master because of that movement. But that's all for the tier list. Let me know what you guys think about the tier list in the comments below if you agree, disagree. I do want to talk now about maybe what we can learn from all this, because I think we can kind of look at trends in at least how I ranked the characters and come to some conclusions about what's important in the game right now. And the first thing I'm going to say is movement matters a lot. You'll notice the bottom 2 tier characters are Malty, who has really bad movement, and Artificer, who has really bad movement. And the top tier characters are Huntress with very good to great movement, and Loader, who I would say has the best movement in the game. Pairing movement with items like Tougher Time, Aegis, Topaz, Brooch is better than healing any day. Where Engineer has that great healing and great protective capacity, the Engineer's inability to escape from bad situations and basically having to stay put allows swarms to gather, allows Malachites to attack, and that is what prevents Engineer from rising to the top tier. Whereas if you compare Tougher Times, Aegis, and Topaz Brooches, that mobility added with those items will make someone like Huntress or Loader excel any day of the week. That being said, healing is still insanely important, even if Malachites can disrupt things late in the game. And that is why Engineer and Rex are high tier, because especially with that healing buff I talked about, or nerf, it's extremely important to be able to heal still. And Rex's out of the gate healing combined with crowd control really makes the character excel with the insane damage potential. While the character doesn't have great movement, the character does have a dash, which is actually really good for even pushing enemies off the edge of the stage. And Engineer, again, great healing potential and protective potential with that shield. And the last thing I want to talk about is crowd control being insanely important in this game. Being able to take out more than one enemy at a time, being able to trap groups of enemies, being able to kind of cattle and corral groups of enemies is extremely important, which you'll notice the top 3 characters that I have right now, Loader, Huntress, and Rex. Rex can put down those vine traps, which is great for crowd control. Huntress can use the Rain of Arrows ability, and ideally you get a cube with it. Either way, just having that Rain of Arrows combined with the right click, which is throwing that disc that can bounce 6 times, both great crowd control tools without any equipment. And Loader can dash through enemies as well as throw down that drone that can electrocute. All great crowd control tools. And that is it for the Skills 2.0 tier list. Wow, what a long video. Guys, let me know what you think down in the comments below. That is all from me. I will catch you guys next time.